Thanks so much for being here with the Capacity Building Institute. I'm your host today, and I'm so excited about this topic because it's one that I could probably talk about for about a day and a half, but we have experts, don't worry. We're going to be meeting lots of different people today and to talk a little bit about grants and what that really means for you. And if you've ever applied for a grant, you're probably, that's why you're here, is because it's such an important part of nonprofit work. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Owen Wadey to the show. Hi, Owen.
Hello, Sam. How are you?
It's great to have you here. And Owen is going to talk to us a little bit about CBI while we all get settled for our grant discussion. Take it away, Owen.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for showing up today for our first Capacity Series webinar of 2023. I've just got a very quick presentation to share with you. Yeah, so we've got a fantastic discussion happening today, so I won't keep you too long. Just to introduce myself, my name's Owen Wadey, and I'm the communications coordinator over at the Capacity Building Institute. And for those of you that aren't familiar, CBI, we're an organization working outside of Ottawa, and we aim to provide training, coaching, mentorship support to staff and volunteers in the environmental and nonprofit sector throughout Canada. I'm sure many of you can agree that work in the nonprofit sector, you often find you're working with limited resources and training. So our goal at CBI really is to kind of foster leadership within the environmental sector and provide that training and coaching to those that work in the sector. And we do it to like all stages throughout people that work in the sector. So we have training for executive directors, we do training with board members, we have fundraising training, and then we also offer to other staff that we have training services for new members who are kind of working their way into the sector. And our mission is just to train 10,000 leaders of small shop nonprofit environmental organizations in Canada within the next 10 years. We have some core beliefs, and that basically we just believe that Canada's environment deserves all the help it can get. We think that environmental nonprofits play a vital role, and we think that training matters. So really, we're just here to offer support to all those organizations out there that are doing great work in Canada. We work in particular with small shop organizations, and we believe they can make a big difference. So we kind of work with those like scrappy underdog organizations, like maybe there's like one paid staff member, there's two paid staff members, or maybe no paid staff members at all, and it's all volunteers. And really what we want to do at CBI is just offer that support and make sure that they can get the work done that they want to do. And there's so much more to do. That's what we believe. We think the environmental sector, it's very strong, but we think with training and more support that we can really start achieving the goals we want to achieve. So what we offer at CBI, we have a few programs and training services. Our flagship training is the Capacity Building Certificate Program. And we're actually excited that we're in our 5th year here now at the Capacity Building Institute. So we have a very special kind of 5-year anniversary training program this year where we're offering like a lot of the course content to all alumni throughout the last 5 years. We have an internship training program, which we run in conjunction with Eco Internships, which I believe you'll be hearing from later in today. We do fundraising training, and we also do leadership training. And then of course we have our capacity webinar series, which we run once every month. And we just kind of tackle a range of topics in the nonprofit sector. So it can be anything from burnout, dealing with boards, or like today we have like a grants program. And then some of you might recognize Dominique Souris. She was a graduate of our CBCP, the Capacity Building Certificate Program. And then we have our lead trainers, which kind of provide us support and training in a range of topics. So you might recognize Sam Laprade here, who's our wonderful host. She's also an expert fundraiser, and she does training on fund development. We also do training. We have trainers who deal with engagement organizing, executive leadership and governance, and then also communications within the nonprofit sector. So yeah, that's really all there is from me. If you have any questions, or if you're looking for capacity support with your organization, you can email us here at info@capacitybuilding.ca. And then we do have our next webinar series coming up on the 6th of March, which is about fundraising strategies. And Sam will be here again. And we also have Catherine McDonald, who's another expert fundraiser, and they'll be talking about fundraising stuff, which should also be good. So enjoy the webinar.
Thank you
I had to
so
write it
much,
down.
Owen. Appreciate all that great information. I've been working with Capacity Building Institute for a number of years now, and I just can't say enough about the experience that I've had. I'm so glad that you're all here as well. Let's get to these great guests. I'm really thrilled to, first of all, welcome Tais McNeill. Hi, Tais. There he is. He's been in my office. He's shared all the goods with people across, especially the Ottawa area. Tais is the Senior Associate of Community Engagement with the Ottawa Community Foundation. And I will tell you, he is one of the most patient people I've ever met. So thank you for that very much, Tais. Patient with me, I should say. I'm asking a lot of questions. Tais is fantastic. Sarah Trudeau, welcome as well. Sarah is the program lead of the Community Services Recovery Fund for the Community Foundations of Canada. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. Certainly an important topic today with you. And of course, my good friend, Kristina Inrg, joining us, president of Sustainable Capacity Foundation. Kristina's the one that got me in, and I'm never leaving now, Kristina.
Well, good. We don't want you to leave, Sam. Nice to see you.
Appreciate it very much. And I know I think we have a record number of people today joining us, and I'm so happy about that because this is such an important discussion in terms of grants. I think, if you've ever written a grant, whether it be on your dining room table or whether it be with a team at the office, it can feel very daunting. We're going to take the daunting out of it, right, Tais? Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So let's start with some questions that I have that will help guide some of our people tonight. First of all, I just want to say as well, we're seeing people from literally all over this country, and I am absolutely thrilled. Everything from PEI to British Columbia and everything in between. So thank you so much. So Tais, first question, when we think about grants, there's big databases and there's all sorts of opportunities, and whether it's the Community Foundation here in Ottawa or it's Community Foundation of Canada, what would be sort of the number one piece of advice you would give when you look at a grant and you think, is this grant for me? Because a lot of us try to pigeonhole ourselves into grants that we're never going to get. Tais, help us.
That's a great question, Sam, and thanks very much for having me, everybody. Great to be here. I just wanted to note, by the way, I do these sorts of sessions fairly regularly, normally just for folks in Ottawa, and it's so great seeing people in the chat from all across the country. It's great to have a chance to connect with folks outside of the city. To your question, Sam, there's a balance in determining whether or not to apply for different funding opportunities, right? Because on the one hand, you don't want to close any doors. You never know where you might get lucky. On the other hand, we all know applying for grants can take a lot of time. Sometimes even small grants can take far more time than they're probably worth. I think first and foremost, I would say you can't do this with every funder, but don't necessarily be afraid to reach out. Sam, you mentioned off topic, you and I have spoken before. I've spoken with a lot of the community organizations that are on the call that are from the Ottawa area. Not every funder is able to do this, but some of us are, and it's worth having. I'd rather have a 15-minute conversation with you, save you 3 hours applying and me however many hours processing and reviewing your application, than have you go through it all right when it's just not a good fit. So try and find out if you can do that. The other thing that's worth doing is trying to just find out as much as you can about the organization you're applying to, right? Some funders will have a whole pile of information, applicant guides and resources and stuff like that. But even if they don't, you can take a look at things like their annual report, right? Almost every single funder or foundation will have some version of that. You can see the kind of things they've supported before. You can see the scale, the focus, the type of grant they've funded before, and get a sense of at least the ballpark, right? Do you at least fit into the ballpark? You might technically be eligible, but if everything they funded last year is pretty different than what you're looking at doing, odds are pretty good you're not a great fit. Likewise, their name might be something about a particular focus area, but if you look at what they're doing, you actually do fit. And I think just on that point, I think this is particularly relevant for the environmental sector, which obviously is the focus today. The environment touches on so many other issue areas, right? I know the folks in the call know this, but climate is a poverty-related issue. Climate is a health-related issue, right? And so you might have funders who aren't technically eco funders who aren't technically focused on climate solutions, but where what you're doing might be a really good fit. And so being a bit creative about what you work in, what you qualify for, can actually be a really great strategy.
Tais, really helpful. Thank you so much for that. And on the flip side of it, Sarah, I have to ask you this, because sometimes we try to pigeonhole ourselves into some funding, but sometimes we try to create programs that don't exist to get funding. And we're doing ourselves a disservice there because we're not sticking to our mandate. Help us from that perspective.
Thanks so much. And hi, everyone. Good to see everyone. I am just new to the whole cross Canada webinar. So typically I'm like Tais and I'm on webinars specific to my area, but with Community Foundations of Canada, this is probably my third or fourth cross Canada webinar. So welcome and thank you for having me. And I suppose I want to echo everything that Tais just said. I think he was really great in articulating exactly what we're looking for when we're a funder, especially at that local level or that citywide level. So from a national perspective, it's a bit different. Typically, there's more details and more boxes to fit in, I would say, when you're applying for this national funding. So national funding, there's definitely areas where, especially if the Government of Canada is looking for, or that branch of the Government of Canada is looking for. So you don't necessarily will have that local contact like what Tais was saying, where you'd have that local contact where you can reach out. However, we are Community Foundations of Canada. So there's 191 community foundations across Canada, and that's who we work with when we do these government programs. So there usually is a local contact. So if you have that local contact, I would say reach out. If that isn't available to you, then do your work, do your homework. Go onto the website. There's usually a plethora of resources available, and really look to where, if your organization is eligible, if your project idea or activity is eligible, that's really, really important. With these national programs, the applications are typically a lot longer than what you'll see. So there's a lot more work involved. There's a lot of documents that you have to provide in these types of applications. So, my first advice is, if there isn't a local contact for you to reach out to, is do your homework, go on the website, look to see the information available, look to see if you're an eligible organization. I know for the Community Services Recovery Fund, we've provided a ton of information and resources for applicants. So there's a decision tree matrix you can go through. There's a how to apply questionnaire, which will help determine A, if you're an eligible organization, B, if your project's eligible, and C, who to apply for, as this funding is being collaboratively put on by 3 different national funders. So there's a ton of resources out there for you when in determining if you're eligible. But and just in general, though, do your homework, ensure that it is that you are an eligible organization before you put in the time, because it is a time investment when you're applying to these national programs.
Beautifully said, Sarah. And I don't know about you, Kristina, but I certainly have sat at my dining room table sometimes thinking, okay, I'm going to apply for this grant, and when I look at everything that I have to do, sometimes it truly is not worth it, or I feel like just writing a $5,000 check myself, so I don't have to write the grant. And I mean that lovingly, because sometimes it just doesn't meet, right? And Sarah brought up a really good point, is that, and I always like to think about it as a grant toolkit, that you have all these documents that you need, and keeping them fresh, such as addresses for board members, or birth dates, or all of those things that might be like, oh my gosh, I got to contact all these people to get this. During the downtime, taking a couple of hours to kind of freshen those documents up, and that way you're just going to a file and it's grant toolkit and it's all there. Kristina, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say that when I was listening to exactly what you said, Sam, which is make sure you have a folder and you have all your key organization documents collected ahead of time. And yes, they do need to be refreshed, but this can include, the obvious ones like your board of director list, your financial statements. Also make sure you know what level of financial statements you have, because more and more funders are requiring different levels of financial statement. So for example, the Ontario Trillium Foundation won't accept applications if you're over a certain size and don't have audited financial statements. Some foundations will allow you to apply with internally prepared, again, often depending on your size. So make sure you kind of know, as the grant writer, as the person writing the grant, whether you're a volunteer, whether you're paid to do that, whether you're the ED, whether you're a coordinator of a program, know what equipment you have in your toolbox, and then know what they can be used for. So financial statements are definitely a must. And usually when someone asks for the financial statements, they're asking for the most recently completed fiscal year. I often see groups pulling together their like board statement that just came out, but most of the time what they're asking for is the completed fiscal year, depending on your year end, which again is going to be different for every organization. So pull that together, pull your board list, pull some of the most important documents about your organization, things like your strategic plan, or if you have a one-pager describing your organization, you won't always be allowed to add those kinds of attachments, but sometimes you can. And so it's just good to have them at your fingertips. And it also means if you're having other people help you write the grants, if you're working as a team, as a volunteer committee, or with multiple staff, that you all are pulling from the same equipment to be able to write these and have them ready to go. And the other thing I'll often suggest is if you know you're going to be going for a certain type of grant, for a, like, let's say it's a community garden, because I see a lot of people here from gardening programs, or maybe it's a climate related grant, you know, you can also work on developing some language together. You just create a Google Doc, create some language around that initiative, get it together. And then when you get to a given proposal, they're going to have very specific questions that you may have to fill out, but having pre-thought through your theory of change, the reason why you're doing it, who's going to be involved, types of volunteers, what impacts it has on who, that can really help you kind of get yourself going when it comes to writing those proposals. But absolutely, I encourage every group to have that little toolkit ready to go of all the things they need when they're going to be applying for a grant, because it's going to make it so much simpler. And then going back to Sarah's point, when they ask your eligibility, you can look at your toolkit and say, am I eligible for this? Am I a charity, for example? And if you are a charity, you should have a charitable registration page saved in your key documents, and you know if you are, well, you should know that anyway, but if you, knowing the level of audit for your financial statements, you should be able to figure that out really quickly, and so that you're not wasting time if you're not eligible.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the wisdom of someone that's applied for 2,500 grants, I'm sure, in your career. And let me go back to you, Tais, and really talk a little bit about the challenge that a lot of us have when we're given a little box and we're told, 200 characters, or, we have to jam something into 75 words. It can be, it can feel a bit daunting to us as people that are applying for grants. But talk to us about it from your end, because I think sometimes when I'm reading grants from clients and they're wondering why they're not getting them, I don't see any motives there. I see it being very just kind of cut and dry. There's no storytelling there. And I know it's hard to do that in a small space, but give us some advice there.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sam. And I think there's a couple of things to think through when you're trying to, because you're right, most grant applications have short spaces and are often very specific questions, right? And so it can be hard to draw a narrative in like 200 word boxes that are asking for different things. So I think one thing I would add, and it ties back to the last question about your toolkit, before you look at the application form, or at least before you start writing it, draft the points you want to make sure you get across. Because even if we don't ask for it, it might be really, really important. So for example, not every funding application form will ask about partnerships. But if what you're doing is like a deep collaborative and relies on that, just because we don't ask about it doesn't mean you don't need to get it across. So make sure you know what you want to say, not that you're just responding to what we happened to have asked for. And then think through, I think, some of the underlying kind of assumptions that you're making in your narrative, right? I mean, everybody working in this space, whether it's the environmental space or more broadly the social good space, everybody deeply believes in what you do and what they do. That's why you're here. But not everyone else knows what you're doing as well as you do. In fact, almost nobody else knows what you're doing as well as you do. Not everyone else understands why it's important, how it ties into other things, some of the basic assumptions, even things as simple as like acronyms or assuming everyone understands exactly what you're talking about. So thinking through what the narrative you're trying to communicate is and making sure you start from the beginning of it as much as possible. This will vary a little bit. If you get a very tailored call for something very specific, you can probably dispense with some of the sort of initial stuff. But don't assume that the person reading it knows what you're talking about to the degree that you do, because we almost certainly don't, right? Like the Community Foundation that I work for, we fund every single issue area. So I just got 160 applications in our last call. They're across everything from seniors to environment to youth to health to arts. I'm not an expert in any of those areas. And so when somebody jumps into their thing and doesn't give a background of why what they're doing is important, where it's coming from, we're sort of lost, right? A second point I'd make, you talked about emotive writing, Sam, and I think there's a really important balance here, right? To tailor your writing and your story to what you're applying for. Because on the one hand, you're right. You want to make sure you're telling a clear story, that the person reading it is understanding what you're saying and gets what you're trying to communicate. At the same time, in my experience, and again, this will vary funder to funder, but you don't necessarily want a grant application to sound like a fundraising pitch, right? Like there's tugging at heartstrings for donors at your annual holiday appeal. That's written one way, and it's often quite emotive and quite sort of a story about one person or one, right? And then there's writing for a grant application, and you might have parallels and you might pull from one to the other, but your application needs to be a little more business-like without losing the heart, but like a little bit more business-like, a little bit more clear, because what you're really trying to do is explain in detail what you'll do with these specific funds, not just what your organization does more broadly, right? So there needs to be some clarity of work plan, of activities. I said this before, it's amazing how few of our grant applications have like clear verbs in them, like actions, right? Like things you're actually going to do with the money, not just what it is you're hoping to see happen or what the end result is supposed to be, but like literally like we will run 6 workshops or we will hold 10 children's classes. Whatever the actual action is often actually missing. So just thinking that through from a work plan perspective, making sure that the reader understands what you'll actually be doing, I think is critical. And often easy to overlook. Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And Sarah, let me ask you this, when you think about the timelines for grants, sometimes people will look at their work plan and think, okay, well, that's, way down the road. I'm going to do that later. And all of a sudden it sneaks up on them. Walk us through from your perspective, from a granting perspective, what you see with people that you're working with in terms of the lead up time and what we should look for in terms of turnaround time from the funder and then, to the day we get the check, and then the accountability piece.
Yeah, great question. I think this is something that, and me, I've written grants as well, is that we often don't think about that work back plan because, you often say, oh, okay, that application isn't due for a couple months, or I've got, weeks to fill it out. But then what happens is you leave it off the side of your desk. And we always see this, we all know this, like 95% of our applications will come in the last 24 hours of the deadline. And so that's great. And, typically that works out, but oftentimes we don't often anticipate technical issues. And this has happened in past government programs, especially as more and more funders move on to online software application portals or wherever you're calling in from or trying to access. There could be internet issues, like we don't know, right? So I think leaving it to that last 24 hours isn't reasonable. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know about outages or weather issues. And so there's often lots of times that there's technical issues at the end. And funders have a final deadline. Unless you have a really valid excuse, that is the deadline. And I know that at a national level, that's what we have. So, not leaving it to the last minute is probably one very important point. And then just as you're planning out the application, so like thinking back, making sure you're reading through that material. Most funders will tell you, here is the intake timeline. Here is the review timeline that happens internally. Here is when you'll be notified. And then there's going to be that other really important date that says, this is when you'll receive your grant. So that might be the next fiscal year. So that might be months from when you actually get notified. So making sure you make note of that. So if that doesn't work in your work plan, that's probably a good flag that maybe this funding won't work. And then not only if you spend the time putting your application, then you're funded, then you're successful, and then you realize, oh shoot, that doesn't work for my timeline. So then not only do you have to go back and you don't get the money, but then the funder has to go back and find another applicant to issue the funding to. So it's kind of on both sides, like just making sure that you're taking note of those really important timelines and deadlines in that application, not only for you, but also for the funder. Because oftentimes in the national funding program, we have to have money out at a certain time, or it's a certain date. So we have to work on a timeline that isn't necessarily flexible with us. We're working with often the government of Canada's timeline.
Brilliant. And that's exactly why I asked that. I knew you'd know. Thanks so much, Sarah. And Kristina, when you think about, working internally on a grant, I'm going to put my hand up and say sometimes that was the most challenging part of the grant, is getting information from other people within the organization, getting the signing authorities, all of those pieces. So to Sarah's point about sort of backing out the work, if we're asking for internal partners to provide, program details and timelines, like going back to what Tais said, we're going to run 10 workshops, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Talk to me a little bit about that internal conversation.
I mean, I think it's challenging here because I think in a perfect world, we're all working really far ahead on everything and having time to think through. But the reality is most of us are running around like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to respond to applications coming and going, and often the government of Canada, as an example, will have applications come out of nowhere and then have a deadline like 3 weeks later. And then you expect to hear, and no offense, but this is the reality of a lot of federal grants, for example. They say you'll hear at one point, and then months and months go by. Like we just got a grant. One of my groups got a grant 2 years after applying, and it was for a significant amount, like over 200,000. On a grant that we thought was like long gone, we'd never hear again, for quite a large grant. So number one, don't lose hope if a long time has gone by. But number two, there's a challenge on both sides. On the before the deadline side, you don't always have the room and the flexibility. Sometimes you are just running around like crazy trying to pull everything together, and that is the fact of the matter. And then on the other side, sometimes, like I know Ottawa Community Foundation is really good about this. When you're supposed to hear back, you do hear back, and generally when things can start. And other times, you get the grant and you were supposed to have retroactively already started it, which of course is impossible for all of us. We can't, for the small shops especially, you can't start a grant if you don't know you have the money for it. So so just kind of balancing those is one of the challenges. And I completely forgot your question, Sam, but I had to respond to what Sarah was saying there, because I feel like in a perfect world we would all work backwards and give ourselves lots of time, but in reality we're often juggling, and so it's doing the best you can. You're spinning a lot of plates at the same time. Yes, try to make sure you have the right funder that you're picking, and at the same time be patient with yourself and be forgiving of yourself and your team, because there's a lot going on, a lot flying at you, and you never know what's coming. Like since COVID, the ability to be predictable. Thank you for the Ottawa Community Foundation for not changing your deadlines, because that has been predictable. But a lot of funders, things that you expected would happen at certain times, throw those out the window. The world of funding has changed. Deadlines happen who knows when, and it's very hard to predict, which makes it very challenging for the sector. And so as a funder, I recognize that for sure.
And I'll just ask you, just for like even just 30 seconds, working with the internal team was a piece, like, and grace and all of those things are great, but at the end of the day, if you're asking a program manager, for instance, maybe I'm reliving my own trauma here a little bit, but if you're asking a program manager for something over and over and over again, and it just gets pushed back, then they put you in an awkward spot, and then you're up at 11:55 trying to press send, right?
Absolutely. The more you can pull things, that's why the more you can do ahead of time to get some of your language and, documentation together, the easier it is. But for sure, grant application should be a team effort. And, going back to what you said in some of your other talks, Sam, you always want to give yourself time for someone else to take a look at the full application from the outside. I know I think you joke about your grandma or somebody reading over the applications, but absolutely have someone take a look at the full piece, and which means you need to have all the little pieces come together in time to give someone who's not right inside your inside your organization a chance to take a look. Because going back to Tais's point, you don't know who's going to be reading these applications. And a lot of the time it's not people who are directly from the sector that you're writing about. And so you need to make sure that the language you use is understandable. You're not trying to dumb it down, but you're just trying to make sure that you explain things and that you don't use acronyms that are inappropriate, or you don't just make assumptions. And that's why having someone who isn't so connected to it can sometimes help, taking that external look.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely. Tais, I'm going to ask you a question. You've probably never heard this question before. Are you ready? How much do we apply for, Tais?
Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it? Yeah. Just quickly before I answer, I just wanted to give a hearty +1 to what Kristina just said about having somebody. I say usually like your spouse or partner or best friend, if you have one, somebody who doesn't work for you reading the application. It really does wonders. Yeah, great question, Sam. So I mean, the off the bat point is like many funders will have parameters, right? Like our community foundation, we say on the website what the normal grant range is for our community grants. Community Services Recovery Fund that Sarah's been talking about. It's clear in the applicant guide on the website and in the form. It's very evident with the parameters. If you're applying to somebody like a private foundation or somebody who just gives no indication, there's not a lot I can say other than two things. One, to loop back to my first point, if you can take a look at there, I mean, every funder will have a bare minimum their page on the CFRE website, which will list all the payments that they made in the previous year. And many will have their annual reports and stuff. So you can find out what their typical grant range is. Beyond that, and even for folks where you do know the range you're applying to. So for example, the recovery fund, it's 10 to 100,000 for the main tier, for tier 1 applications. That's a pretty big range, right? And it may be really attractive to just see that 100,000 and apply for 100,000 because that's what you're allowed to apply for. And I would maybe challenge everybody to be really honest with yourself, right? First of all, how much are you ready to take on? Like I hear what you're saying, Kristina, about running around like chickens with your heads cut off, and I appreciate that. I've worked in community as well, and I don't say that pejoratively. That everyone's doing a million things because you don't have enough. Like I'm very aware of that, but that also maybe means you're maybe not ready to do the huge thing, right? And when you apply, that often comes through in the application and how detailed your work plan is and how clear everything is laid out. So maybe the range is up to 100, but maybe when you think about it, your application for 40, where you can put together a really, really well laid out plan that you're sure you can deliver, is a better fit than your $100,000 application, where you're kind of stretching and the budget looks a little weird and every line in the budget ends in 3 zeros, which clearly means you're estimating and everything's not as fully thought through. So even within the ranges, like be really honest with yourself about what you'll be able to deliver on, how much you really need to do what you're doing, and what the real impact will be. Because I will say, I think more and more funders, and I know we're in this category, are moving away from doing partial funding. So for a lot of funders, it's been, you apply for 100 because you're expecting to get 30, right? That's not a helpful system for anybody. It's not good for us because you're now on the hook for a $100,000 project and we only gave you 30K. We don't have an honest application to actually read because you've put together something that's totally out of whack. So I think a lot of funders are moving more towards, look, tell us what you really need, put a real budget in there, back it up. And if it doesn't make sense, then we're not going to fund it even at half of what you're asking for. We're just not going to fund it. So really being honest with yourself and with the funder about that, I think is challenging. And I know it's hard to like leave money on the table, but I think in the end, you're not really. I think you're giving yourself a better shot if you maybe come in a little bit more reasonable, but be really confident that you're going to be able to deliver, going to be able to make the best use of the funds.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I appreciate that perspective for sure. Sarah, let me ask you, when we're in the application stage and we're applying for something, and there's maybe something we're having a challenging time responding to, and I'm kind of picking up on what Tais said, and, we don't feel 100% prepared, but the 85% is there. Should we plow ahead? Like I'm sensitive to, Tais was just saying, I got 160 applications for this time. I'm sensitive to the amount you also receive. At what point do we say, maybe this isn't the time, maybe this isn't appropriate for us? Like, if you're looking at applications, does it have to be 100% or don't even bother applying, or is there some wiggle room?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's interpretive. So, we know that across Canada, we'll receive applications from every different level. So like noting smaller organizations, their capacity to write applications versus a large organization in Toronto would have a different capacity. They may even have a professional grant writer. So we take all that into account when we review applications. We know that a small grassroots organization in some remote place, their level of application will look very different from a large one. So I think really noting that, like, we always take geographic and community organization size into account. I would say, if you're passionate and you want the grant, write the application and submit it. I think if you have the opportunity to reach out, and if you've got questions about the application and you're stuck and you don't know how to move forward, if there is I feel like most funders do have some sort of contact line. It may take some digging, but I would say reach out. But put in the application. You never know. You never know how many applications they've received. You never know how much funding they have available, or if they've got extra funding. So if it's worth it, plug through, put in the application. And I will say, if it's in a compelling application and the funder's interested, they'll reach out to you and they'll ask you questions, and they'll ask those clarifying questions. So maybe you're not prepared to answer them on the application and you need to just get it in. Don't stop there. Try to continue on, even if you've submitted the application. You never know if they're going to reach out and ask for more details on the application.
Mm-hmm. And Kristina, when we receive those messages, either asking for clarifying questions, or it can feel a bit daunting. I've been there. I applied for a $750,000 grant at one point. We did receive it in the end, but to get those questions, it can feel a bit like you've got that spotlight on you and you want to make sure you answer everything correctly, but it can feel a bit daunting.
Well, I get excited when I get questions because it means that there is some serious interest in your application. So to me, getting questions from a funder about your application is a really good sign. It means that they've taken a look at it. There's interest that it might be going to the next level. Sometimes it means you just missed something and they're giving you a chance to get it in there, which frankly is generous, because there are other funders who, if you miss something basic, they just cut you out completely and you're ineligible for a silly attachment you missed, right? So I always love it when questions come in, because it's either a chance to get something in that you missed or a chance to provide more clarity about what they're asking. So I use those opportunities to really strengthen the relationship and to really provide more detail. Always make sure, this is kind of a simple and obvious one, but I am always amazed at how many people miss this. Make sure you answer the question that's asked. So that goes for the grant application as well, right? Because I used to be on the committee that Tais is involved in with the Ottawa Community Foundation. I spent 6 years reading hundreds of applications, and sometimes the answer to the question is not what was asked, and so you're left scratching your head thinking, what is the answer? And that goes with follow-up questions from the funder. So if they ask you for details on part of your budget or details on a section of your application, make sure you're providing those details. And that goes for if you get turned down also. Like, there's also that open conversation that can happen after. That doesn't mean that the door is totally closed. And I just really want to emphasize that, because, and maybe we'll get into this later. I saw Jim put a question in there, but I just really feel passionately that a no is not necessarily a closed door forever. And you have to make sure that you're going to keep pursuing those relationships when they make sense.
Absolutely. Wise words again. I think we could make this a day-long seminar, but anyway, we've only got a bit of time left. We want to give some time to the lovely Miriam Watts. Hello, Miriam.
Hello.
Miriam's going to share a little bit of content with us today, and we'll be right back with you.
All right, so my name's Miriam. I'm the Green Services / Outreach Coordinator for Eco Internships. Today, I'm just going to be talking a bit about who we are and our program and how you can apply to it. So I'm just going to start with this short video.
Sometimes when people think of sustainability, they think that it's this crazy big thing and you have to be a tree hugger and you have to be all about green, but it goes deeper than that, and it's about kindness and being human.
I went through life not really knowing what I wanted to do. And then I discovered sustainability through my master's degree and realized not enough people are doing anything about this.
Youth across Canada have been brought together through eco-internships, formerly the Sustainable Eastern Ontario Internships Program, which matches post-secondary graduates or soon to graduate with environmental and sustainability charities and not-for-profits.
This internship opportunity, well, firstly, it means stability to me. So at a wage that is above minimum wage.
The Frontenac Archbiosphere Network has taken on 3 interns, and it's awesome. It's fantastic so far.
I really like it. Why? Because I get to organize something that I know will impact the life of some people. A community. It's not some abstract thing that I'm doing. It's something very concrete. It's very ground level.
The program helps to take out the financial, training, and HR burden off of small organizations in locating and applying to funding and wage subsidies. The intern is placed in a paid internship program through the Capacity Building Institute to support this transition.
The internship training was really eye-opening, like learning about how different boards work.
You know, we've learned about different things such as fundraising, outreach, communications, but even just ways in which you can create a better platform for your organization.
So when you do your internship with the organizations you are placed in, that you have more of an idea where to start and that you're not completely thrown into the deep end.
I feel like it's meant like everything to me, especially coming out of university during COVID, where there was so much employment loss. Just to be able to kind of come in and start from the ground running and to help support organizations now.
On my own, I would not have known how to go about finding interns because staffing is a problem with nonprofits.
The internship program started back in 2017, and basically we didn't have enough staffing capacity as small organizations to really do all the work we wanted to do.
I have to say I was a little bit worried taking on 2 students and how much work we would have to do and how much we would put in for how much we got out. But my gosh, within a week or 2 of having those 2 young ladies start working with us, it was just phenomenal. We were just so impressed with their quality.
So if we can help take care of some of the paperwork that's involved, then that's a huge burden off of those organizations. And then if we can support the interns to have a positive experience and help them, that'll also help to make sure it's great all around.
So about us, we are a nonprofit social enterprise designed to help small shop environmental nonprofits with human resourcing and staffing needs. We do this by partnering them with interns and placing them with organizations across the country. Our mission is to build capacity within the sector and connect these organizations with funding opportunities to hire the interns. Since the launch of the program in 2017, we've secured over 150 internships and supported over 60 organizations. We are part of a collective called the Sustainable Capacity Foundation. So we are including CBI, we are one of 5 organizations who work together to build capacity within the sector. So why hire interns? Hiring interns is a great way to build capacity within your organization and also improve organizational diversity. When you do hire these youth interns, you have young, eager, new professionals really looking to make a difference, who are really excited to be working in this field. You're helping them develop their leadership their leadership skills, and you're creating opportunity within the field itself with job opportunities, and you're developing the new generation of the workforce in the nonprofit sector. So the way the program works, we hire the interns at $20 an hour for 30 hours a week at a minimum of a 26-week period. Your interns do have access to mentorship through this. The mentors they're not supervisors, but they're there to be a listening ear, a cheerleader. They are people who have been through the program themselves, and they are there to be an additional support for the intern and sometimes provide them with some advice on how to about their experiences within the program. And then they are required to do our internship training program. Within the program, they go through a couple different themes. We do focus on things like sustainability, remote work, but we do get into fundraising, volunteer engagement, different things like that. It does take about 80 hours, including the live sessions, as well as the assignment activities, and this is part of their paid hours. Some other supports that we supply is helping apply for the wage subsidies, the hiring and recruiting of the interns. The interns come to us through our general pool, and then after a pre-screening process, we then would partner them with the organizations to do their own interviews and hiring. We also help with financial supporting and coaching, as well as some other HR resources. So what does it cost? It does cost around 5 to 10K per intern. A lot of these subsidies will cover anywhere between 75 to 100% of the wages. So typically the leftover is anywhere between 5 to 10K. And then there is a 2K training cost. If this is still outside of an organization's capacity, I would encourage you to book a meeting with Hannah, and she'd be able to give you a little more information about some of the cash flow loans that we do, just to ensure that these costs aren't barriers. The criteria for being in the program, you do need to be incorporated. If you aren't incorporated, you can partner with another organization, and they can either host the intern for you, or you can share the intern as well. You do have to have an annual revenue of less than 500,000. You need to be located in Canada, and you do need to have an official accounting software to issue the pay stubs. If this is something that you don't have, you can reach out to Greenbooks, who is also part of the Sustainable Capacity Solutions, and they can provide you with some support or advice even on how to start that process. So we do have 4 levels of engagement. Tier 1 would be the least amount of support from us. These are organizations who have quite a bit of capacity. They're typically making more than 300K, and there is a small cost for the service, but they do get the training for their interns still. Tier 2 is then with onboarding and reporting and monitoring. That would be the focus. There's still a small cost, but these are organizations that have capacity. Typically, they already have 1 full-time staff, and they can do their own bookkeeping as well. Tier 3 is coaching support. So this is what most of our organizations are at. We are providing them with quite a bit of support, but they are familiar with the program. They've been participating in it. They are capable of doing some of the reporting on their own. And then tier 4 would be full support. These are for very, very small organizations, and they would be getting the full support from us, full reporting, monitoring, even helping with managing the intern. So for the timeline, it is February now, so our application portal has been open for about a month. We have been doing some intake meetings. We started the intake meetings in February, and we will be starting some pre-screening for the interns as well. So then into March, we'll be hopefully having organizations starting to do their own interviews with the interns. And then the first round of wage subsidies does open in April. So we do encourage the employers and organizations to apply soon, so that they can have some interns in mind when we start applying for these wage subsidies. And then the earliest possible start date for your interns would be in June. And then July is when our training program would begin. And in August, the application portal does officially close, so we would no longer be accepting any applications from employers. And then between September and February, depending on when your intern starts, we would be doing monitoring and reporting on midterms and finals and things like that. So how to apply? You can visit our website and click on our Apply Now page. The first step would be to download the employer recruitment overview package. This is going to go into a little bit more detail about things that I've touched on today. And then you would submit your application and book a follow-up meeting. Once those steps are completed, you would be, all that's left is to sign the MOU with Eco Internships, and you'd be officially part of the program. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to myself or Hannah or our executive director, Chantel. Thank you.
Fantastic, Miriam. Thank you so much. Appreciate all that great information. And we'll have our continuing conversation with our panelists today. And we've gotten some questions. James had written a couple in the Q&A. I feel free to add yours as well if you wanted to add a question or two. We've already sort of addressed the first one, but the one, and Kristina sort of alluded to this as well, is if the grant is refused, how can we learn from this? And I think Tais and Sarah, if you want to turn your cameras back on, we'll continue our chat. I'll start with you this time, Sarah. What can we learn with the fact that we get turned down? What's the lesson?
Yeah, good question. You know, it's hard. So from a national perspective, you'll get a very generic letter. There's typically not a lot of information included in that. Just on the sheer volume of the amount of information that we have to send out, we can't provide that additional information. And I mean, I will say, and to be brutally honest, at a national level, there probably isn't a person that you can reach out to and ask for more information and to get that feedback. Usually you'll get some sort of answer like you were ineligible, or, you know, we didn't have enough funding, that kind of thing. So very generic. And probably Tais will be able to speak to this in more detail, but at a local level, you'll get a lot more information. And I know I always encouraged my applicants to reach out and ask questions why they weren't successful, because it might have been something simple that you can fix the next time. And it might have been a program detail. So yeah, I'll probably pass it over to Tais because he can provide a lot more detail in getting feedback at a more local level versus a national level.
Tais, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Great answer, Sarah, and thanks for the question. Yeah, so I think, I mean, to Sarah's point, we offer, you know, we don't put the rationale in the grant letter because it's often not something necessarily wants to go into writing per se, but we offer a chance to connect with us and speak about what our committee thought, what their questions were, what their reservations might have been, and can absolutely help you try to figure out whether it's like tweak the application and apply again, or just you're not a good fit. Different funders will have different levels of which they're willing to do that, but I would certainly encourage, at the very least, just reaching out and trying. The worst is you won't hear back, but it's worth trying. What I will say, and it's always easy to know which of these you fell into, but Sarah kind of alluded to this, like some funding streams, like 10% or fewer of applicants get funded. So it's not really that you did anything wrong and there's not a lot you could have done differently. It's just that 90% didn't get funded. That's kind of it. Some funding streams, 70, 80% get funded. And so there probably is something that you could tweak or adjust or change for the next time. If it's in the former, like if you know that what you're applying to is, for example, a huge national funding stream and it's more the former, definitely ask for feedback, but don't necessarily take it as there was anything wrong with what you were doing or what you're proposing. Look, grants are not necessarily the ideal way. If we were starting from scratch to allocate the total amount of money available for the sector to do it, what they're trying to do, but it's what we have, and there's just facts to that. So just trying to be a little bit honest about that from a funder perspective, that it's not always that you could have written this little part better and you would have gotten funded. Sometimes it's just that 90% didn't get funded. The odds are not,
you know,
are what they are. Yeah, sorry, Sam.
My apologies for interrupting you.
No.
On that, Tais, you know, it really comes to mind because sometimes we have to, you know, we have to convince our boards to spend time doing this. So with everything that Tais just said and everything that Sarah said today, and we all know that we need to apply for grants, how do we convince our boards if maybe the chance of us getting it is 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10 if we're lucky? Kristina, over to you.
Yeah, and maybe just before talking about convincing our boards, I'll just say I don't think this is a matter of national versus local. I think it's a question of like the funder. So because there are lots of, I sit on the board of the Environment Funders Canada, and there are lots of national foundations on there, many of whom are private foundations, and they do have a very direct relationship with potential grantees, and others don't. So it really just depends on the funder. But it's always, like Sarah said, it's always worth a try to make that request, and sometimes just recognizing that it's not a closed door, it's the start of a conversation. Some funders will very rarely fund you the first time you ask because they just don't know anything about you and they're trying to build that relationship. And sometimes it's just a matter of, well, they had too many applications from that geographic region, whereas the next time they maybe will have none, and so yours will bump up, because there's a lot of other factors than just the application. There's geographic factors, there's financial factors, there's francophone fact, like whether they've funded any francophone grants, whether they've funded certain types of funding. So, you never know all the things that are going on behind the scenes in decision making. It's never as simple as just the application, unfortunately. There's a lot of other factors at play. And so I would say, unless you get a hard no, and even sometimes with a hard no, I don't accept. If I had accepted a hard no when I got turned down for a mortgage when I was 18 and a part-time student, I would have never bought my first property. So sometimes you have to keep going, even when you get a hard no. But especially when it's a soft no and they give you some advice, always go back again, because it can take several rounds to really get to the heart of what they're asking, but also when the timing is right, because timing is a big factor here. So that is part of how you convince your boards. You have to talk about the fact that that timing is not always right, and sometimes you have to try again. And also this issue of, you do get turned down quite a lot. So if you get turned down, if you apply 10 times and maybe you get 2 applications successfully, well, then you have to imagine that you're going to have to apply more than 10 times in order to get a few successful applications. I wish the odds were much better in our favor, but unfortunately it is a very competitive environment for applications. So and then when you have that positive relationship with a funder, that's the other critical relationship, is to keep it strong, to do a really great job reporting, to do a really great job of engagement, and to hope that it can turn into a longer term relationship. Not that you become reliant on them, but that you can turn it into an opportunity for ongoing funding potentially, or a couple of years of funding to sustain some of the programming.
Mm-hmm. I cannot believe it is 5 o'clock. That went by like that. Such great input from all of you today. Really, really helpful to be able to take all of this great tips. I know there's lots of other questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get to them. I think this is a nod to that we have to do this again and have even a deeper conversation. Tais McNeill, thank you so much. And Sarah Trudeau, thank you so much. And the lovely, of course, Kristina Inrg as well for spending time with us today. This is just the beginning of 2023. We have so many other webinars. So I hope this isn't just this one. I think you would be lovely if you joined us for every single one this year. Big shout out as well to Owen and to Miriam for their input today. And Hannah Rockborn, just make sure everything runs smoothly. Thank heavens for Hannah. And thank you to you. I mean, we couldn't do this without you. From BC to PEI and everywhere in between up north. We're happy to have you here. Thank you so much, and happy granting, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.